Welcome to the Sleepy Scribe. After all your endless wandering across the internet, you've finally arrived, hopefully ready to drift off peacefully with today's story. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and how late it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide our listeners reach. And if you enjoy these videos, subscribing would mean a lot. Now, let's begin. The Mongolian steppes stretched endlessly, a rolling sea of grass that rippled like waves under the caress of wind, the horizon stretching as far as the eye could see, touched by a cold, silver light that hinted at both dawn and the harshness of the land. In the midst of this untamed expanse, a boy was born to Yesugei, a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, and his wife, Holan, a woman of remarkable resilience and quiet wisdom. The child's birth was accompanied by an air of portent. The elders whispered of omens, the wind seemed to carry distant voices, and even the steppes seemed to pause, awaiting the life that had come into being. He was named Temujin, after a clan leader who had once brought unity and strength to their people, a name heavy with expectation, destined to shape the boy into someone who would carry both legacy and ambition within his blood. From his first breath, Temujin's life was intertwined with the rhythms of survival, the unforgiving cycles of the steppe, and the subtle hierarchies that governed both clan and family. The boy learned quickly that the wind could bite as sharply as any spear, that snow could bury a man as surely as a rival's blade, and that alliances, fragile as the frost upon morning grass, determined life or death. His earliest memories were of watching his father command respect among warriors, seeing the delicate balance of negotiation, dominance, and trust that kept their clan alive amidst rivals and predators. Yesugei, though stern, was a teacher of nuance and foresight. Strength, he would say, without wisdom, is a blade that cuts only its wielder. Yet even as Temujin observed his father, the harshness of the steppe spared no one. Raids, rivalries, and the constant threat of starvation or violence were the rhythm of existence, and young Temujin learned early to read the intentions in eyes, the tension in shoulders, the subtle shift of wind that might signal danger. Holan, his mother, provided another kind of instruction. Her wisdom was quieter, woven into the long evenings by firelight, the stories of ancestors, the rituals that connected the living to the spirit of the land. She taught patience, empathy, and the power of quiet observation. A leader, she whispered as she braided his hair, hears what is said, but also what is left unspoken. The steppe speaks if you listen. Even as a child, Temujin displayed a rare combination of alertness, curiosity, and intensity. He would run across frozen streams, testing balance and courage, climb rocky outcrops to survey the land, and watch the herds of horses and sheep, understanding the rhythms of movement, timing, and instinct. It was during one winter, when a blizzard swept across the plains, that Temujin first felt the absolute silence of the steppe, the world muted under snow and ice, and he realized the duality of the land. It could nurture life with abundance and crush it with a single misstep. Yesugei, recognizing both the boy's tenacity and intelligence, began to assign small responsibilities. Tending the herds, observing rival clans, carrying messages across long distances, and learning the complex alliances that dictated survival. Each task was a lesson in both action and consequence, a preparation for the future that even the child did not yet comprehend fully. At the same time, life on the steppe demanded camaraderie and rivalry among peers. Temujin encountered children of other clans, some playful, some cruel, testing strength, skill, and wit. He learned quickly that negotiation, courage, and intelligence were equally necessary to survive, and that loyalty could be fleeting unless earned and reciprocated. The stories that circulated around campfires filled him with both inspiration and caution. Tales of great warriors, ancestral spirits, and the vast, mysterious lands beyond the horizon painted a picture of possibility, danger, and destiny. These narratives, combined with his own observations and experiences, seeded a vision in the boy's mind, that life was not only to be survived but understood, mastered, and, when necessary, reshaped. By the time Temujin was old enough to hold a bow or ride a horse alone, he had absorbed the lessons of both parents, the rhythms of the land, and the intricate dance of power among clans. The wide steppes had become both classroom and proving ground, teaching him that leadership required courage tempered with thought, strength accompanied by strategy, and ambition balanced by respect for those who might become both ally and adversary. In the hush of twilight, as the wind whispered through the tall grasses and the horizon burned orange and crimson, Temujin would stand upon a ridge, Bucephalus yet unknown in distant lands, but a spirit of mastery already forming within him, looking across the vastness of the steppe and sensing the immense potential of a world that stretched endlessly before his young eyes. And even in those early years, before the forging of alliances, the brutality of war, or the construction of empire, there was in him a spark, a restless, insistent force that would one day ignite to unite the fractured tribes, challenge kingdoms, and leave a mark upon the earth as enduring and vast as the steppe itself. The winter that followed Temujin's 8th year arrived with a biting ferocity that seemed almost deliberate, as though the steppe itself sought to test the boy's mettle. Snow swept across the plains in waves, drifting into hollows and burying tracks, the cold so sharp it stung exposed skin like the teeth of a wolf. The yurts of the Borjigin clan huddled against the wind, their felt walls barely insulating against the relentless frost, and inside, Temujin's family faced a crisis that would shape the trajectory of his life. His father, Yesugei, had been poisoned in a dispute with a rival clan, the subtle betrayal masked in diplomacy and obscured by smiles. Temujin, still a boy, watched as his father's strength, authority, and protection disappeared before him, leaving a void not only in leadership but in the emotional core of the family. Holan, his mother, became both shield and guide, rallying her children and instructing them in survival with a combination of stern discipline and quiet encouragement. "The steppe does not weep for you," she said one evening, the firelight dancing across her determined face. "Neither shall you weep for yourself. You survive, you endure, you learn." The clan's allies, once loyal to Yesugei, abandoned them now that the patriarch was gone. Temujin felt the sting of betrayal firsthand, witnessing neighbors and supposed friends turn their backs, leaving the family vulnerable to both starvation and attack. Hunger became a constant companion, gnawing at the edges of strength and patience, forcing Temujin to learn how to ration, hunt, and navigate the barren landscape with ingenuity far beyond his years. He learned to read the land in ways most adults did not, noticing subtle shifts in the wind, tracking the faint trails of deer, understanding where the snow might conceal dangers, and when frozen rivers were safe to cross. Even amidst hardship, he never relinquished his curiosity or alertness. Nights were spent around the fire with his mother, listening to stories of ancestors in distant lands, of warriors who had carved kingdoms from the steppe, and of spirits that watched over those clever and brave enough to earn their favor. These tales imbued Temujin with a sense of both possibility and responsibility, a recognition that one's destiny was not handed down but forged through endurance, courage, and cunning. The boy also began to understand the precariousness of loyalty. Among surviving relatives and distant clans, some offered help, others deception. Temujin learned to observe, to question, to recognize subtle signs of deceit, a crooked glance, a hesitation in speech, a hand hovering too long over a weapon. Each encounter became a lesson in strategy, human nature, and the delicate balance between trust and caution. Despite the crushing difficulties, Temujin cultivated resilience and a quiet determination. He wrestled with older boys, sometimes losing, sometimes prevailing, learning not only the strength of muscle but the value of wit, timing, and persistence. He practiced archery and horseback riding, essential skills for survival on the open plains, and discovered a rare bond with horses, understanding their moods, rhythms, and trust in ways that would later become legendary. Winter's harshness was matched by moments of beauty, dawns where frost glittered like scattered diamonds across the grass, sunsets that set the steppe ablaze in orange and violet, and nights where the stars blazed overhead in an infinite tapestry that seemed to promise possibility beyond hardship. In these moments, Temujin felt both the fragility of life and the stirring of a vision that was larger than his immediate suffering. He began to imagine leadership not as entitlement but as a careful balance of justice, courage, and foresight. By the time spring arrived, softening the steppe with melting snow and fresh grass, Temujin had transformed. Hunger and hardship had honed his body, exposure to betrayal had sharpened his mind, and the responsibility thrust upon him had awakened a leadership instinct that neither age nor circumstance could suppress. Holan, proud and ever watchful, saw in her son the emerging spark of someone extraordinary. She guided him with subtle lessons, how to read intentions, how to inspire loyalty, how to act decisively when necessary. "The steppe will test you every day," she said as they rode together along a thawing river. "It will offer hardship and opportunity in the same breath. Learn to distinguish one from the other, and you will endure." Temujin's childhood, though marked by loss and adversity, became a crucible, forging qualities of resilience, intelligence, and intuition that would serve him in the trials ahead. He understood early that survival required not only strength but foresight, not only courage but patience, and that even the smallest decisions could ripple outward to shape destiny. And as he gazed across the vast plains, where the wind swept endlessly and the horizon seemed to touch the sky itself, the young boy sensed a world larger than the struggles before him, a world that could one day bend to the determination, strategy, and relentless spirit that already stirred within him. Spring had fully claimed the Mongolian steppe, painting the rolling hills in shades of green so vivid they seemed almost unreal beneath the stretching blue sky. Streams gurgled with melting snow, and the air carried the mingled scents of wildflowers, fresh grass, and the distant tang of horses. For Temujin, now approaching his early teens, this season of renewal brought both hope and challenge, for the fractured clans of the steppe were restless, and survival demanded not just strength but alliances, fragile, delicate, and often treacherous. The memory of his father's murder lingered, a shadow that guided both caution and resolve. Temujin had learned that clans shifted loyalties as easily as the wind changed direction, and that securing trustworthy allies was as crucial as any sword or arrow. His mother, Holan, reminded him constantly of the intricate web of obligations and debts that bound the steppe's people. "A promise given in trust is stronger than the sharpest blade," she said one morning as they rode along a riverbank. "But beware those who speak too kindly. Their loyalty is like ice, thin and easily broken." Guided by these lessons, Temujin sought out other young leaders and sons of chieftains, learning to gauge character through conversation, observation, and subtle tests of courage and wit. He observed how a slight hesitation in response could reveal doubt, how a glance toward a companion might betray hidden fear, and how those who wielded charm without substance often faltered when confronted with action. Temujin's approach was never blunt. He used intelligence, empathy, and calculated daring to cultivate trust. When a neighboring clan faced a shortage of grain after a harsh winter, he offered assistance, not as charity but as a demonstration of reliability, an early lesson in reciprocal loyalty. The elders of other clans, watching a boy intervene where diplomacy and foresight were required, whispered of his unusual wisdom, noting that he seemed to act with the awareness of one far beyond his years. Bonds were formed not only through promises but shared trials. Temujin challenged potential allies to hunts across the plains, tests of endurance and skill in which cooperation could mean success and failure could mean humiliation or danger. He learned that the strongest bonds were forged under fire, in moments where courage and loyalty were both visible and tested. By adolescence, Temujin had already begun assembling a small network of devoted warriors, young men who respected him not solely for his birth but for his intelligence, fairness, and ability to inspire action. These companions would later become the backbone of his army, the first threads in the tapestry of a leadership built upon merit, loyalty, and vision. At the same time, rivals took notice. Certain chieftains, threatened by his growing influence, sought to undermine him through rumor, sabotage, or outright aggression. Temujin, however, was patient, learning to discern between minor provocations and genuine threats, to strike decisively when necessary and to retreat with honor when caution demanded. One notable encounter occurred when a rival clan attempted to block his path to a river during a spring migration. Rather than charging blindly, Temujin observed their formation, gauged the temperament of the warriors, and orchestrated a clever flanking maneuver using a small group of loyal allies, securing safe passage and demonstrating tactical acumen that impressed both friends and foes alike. These early exercises in alliance, negotiation, and strategy became as vital to Temujin as the bow on his shoulder or the horse beneath him. He understood that strength alone was insufficient on the steppe, that intelligence and loyalty were the currency of survival, and that every interaction, be it a shared meal, a hunting expedition, or a moment of counsel, was an opportunity to cement bonds or uncover weakness. By the time Temujin turned 15, the contours of his emerging influence were visible, a young leader whose reputation blended courage, wisdom, and fairness, a figure whose alliances were both robust and fluid, built on merit and mutual respect rather than mere birthright. And as he rode across the endless expanse of the steppe, watching the horizon shimmer with heat and possibility, he understood that the world of the clans was not static. It was a living, shifting mosaic, demanding attention, strategy, and vision. Each alliance he nurtured, each loyalty he earned, was a step toward something far greater than mere survival. A path that might one day unite the fractured tribes, challenge kingdoms, and forge an empire that would stretch across lands as vast and wild as the windswept plains beneath his feet. The sun rose pale and fragile over the Mongolian steppe, casting long shadows across the frost-hardened grass that still clung to the memory of winter. Temujin, now a boy on the cusp of manhood, felt the weight of both grief and resolve pressing upon his shoulders. The murder of his father years earlier had left a mark upon him deeper than any scar from battle or survival. It had etched into his heart the knowledge that injustice, left unpunished, would always fester like a hidden wound. The clans of the steppe had their own codes, their own notions of honor and retribution, yet Temujin understood that mere emotion could not guide action. Strategy, patience, and careful observation were the tools of justice on these rolling plains. His target was the group responsible for his father's death, men whose treachery had reshaped the destiny of the Borjigin clan. Yet he did not rush blindly, for the steppe rewarded the clever as much as it favored the strong. Instead, Temujin spent months tracking the movements of the rival clan, observing the rhythms of their daily life, noting the times when guards were lax, the alliances they leaned upon, and the weaknesses their pride concealed. Nights were spent around campfires with his small band of loyal followers, whispering plans, rehearsing strategies, and ensuring every detail was accounted for. "We do not strike merely to kill," he told them one evening, the stars overhead glimmering like scattered gems across the sky. "We strike to restore balance, to make clear that betrayal bears a price, and that loyalty is the foundation upon which life endures." The moment of confrontation arrived during a spring hunt. The rival clan had ventured beyond their usual territory, chasing herds into a valley shadowed by rocky outcroppings. Temujin, observing from a ridge, saw the perfect opportunity, not merely to punish, but to demonstrate cunning, control, and calculated power. He led a small group of his most trusted warriors through hidden passes, moving silently like shadows across the grass, until they were positioned to intercept. The ambush was swift, precise, and disciplined. Temujin's warriors struck with the speed and coordination of a single organism, cutting off escape routes, surrounding their targets, and using both arrows and melee with practiced efficiency. The element of surprise and the psychological impact of the attack ensured minimal casualties among his own followers while maximizing the intimidation and impact on the rival clan. Temujin confronted the men responsible for his father's death personally. The encounter was not mere vengeance, it was a lesson in consequence and authority. He spoke with calm intensity, his words measured, and his eyes unwavering. "You dishonored your name and ours. The steppe remembers such deeds." The rivals, realizing the inevitability of justice, faltered and acknowledged their wrongdoing. Some fled, some were bound and presented before Temujin, each outcome carefully considered to reinforce both fear and respect, rather than unchecked brutality. Through this act, Temujin began to cement a reputation that would echo across the plains, that of a young leader capable of decisive action, but also one who weighed honor, loyalty, and strategy above mere anger. Stories of the event spread among neighboring clans, not as rumor alone, but as testament to the emerging power and discernment of the boy who had survived hardship and now commanded respect beyond his years. Even in the aftermath, Temujin understood the subtle consequences of retribution. Alliances strengthened, some wary rivals reconsidered hostility, and his own followers' loyalty deepened as they witnessed their leader's combination of courage, intelligence, and justice in action. Nights afterward, he reflected quietly beneath the vast canopy of stars, feeling the wind sweep across the plains like a living force, reminding him of the fragile balance between life and death, trust and betrayal, power and humility. He realized that leadership demanded not only the willingness to act, but the wisdom to act in ways that shaped the perception of both allies and enemies. The revenge for his father was complete, yet it was more than a personal vindication. It was the first deliberate step in shaping the moral and strategic framework that would guide Temujin's life. A framework in which justice, foresight, and measured strength became inseparable, preparing him for the greater battles, alliances, and conquests that lay ahead across the endless expanse of the steppe and, one day, beyond it. The summer sun beat down relentlessly upon the rolling Mongolian plains, turning the grass into waves of gold that shimmered under the wind's steady caress. Temujin, now entering his late teens, had grown into a figure of quiet authority, his presence commanding attention without the need for harsh words or displays of force. Yet the world of the steppe demanded more than courage and skill in battle. It required diplomacy, cunning, and the careful weaving of alliances. And for Temujin, the bonds of marriage would soon become both a personal union and a political instrument. Bort, the daughter of the Ongirak clan, was a young woman of intelligence, grace, and resilience, qualities that matched Temujin's own. Their union was not born solely of affection, though a spark of admiration and curiosity existed, but of strategic necessity. Marriage on the steppe was a tool for forging alliances, securing loyalty, and strengthening one's clan against the ever-shifting landscape of rivalries. The ceremony itself was simple yet steeped in tradition, held in a circular yurt adorned with felt and painted symbols of protection, prosperity, and connection to the ancestors. Elders from both clans observed closely, their eyes searching not just for signs of respect or joy, but for subtle cues of character, temperament, and compatibility. Temujin and Bort exchanged vows with solemnity, each word carefully chosen, understanding that their union symbolized not just the joining of two people but the intertwining of clans, resources, and influence across the steppe. In the months that followed, the marriage became a crucible for diplomacy. Temujin traveled to Ongirak camps, learning their customs, negotiating disputes, and demonstrating both respect and authority. He observed, with growing awareness, how small gestures, a shared meal, a gift of crafted horse reins, a well-timed compliment, could reinforce loyalty and build trust, while missteps could unravel months of effort. Bort herself was no passive participant. She advised, observed, and guided, offering insights into her people's intentions and temperaments, teaching Temujin lessons in patience, empathy, and subtle influence. Their partnership became a model of strategic cooperation, blending personal bond with political acumen. Beyond his marriage, Temujin continued to expand his network of alliances. He convened meetings with chieftains, sometimes under the guise of trade or festivity, at other times under the shadow of necessity or threat. In these gatherings, he displayed the patience to listen, the intelligence to discern motives, and the firmness to assert his vision without overreaching. It was during one such council that Temujin faced a rival who sought to undermine his growing influence through verbal taunts and insinuations. Rather than react with anger, he allowed the man to speak fully, observing reactions, noting hesitation and pride, and then replied with a calm, measured argument that exposed the flaws in the rival's reasoning while offering a path to cooperation. The elders and warriors present were impressed, and the rival, seeing no advantage in continued hostility, acquiesced, strengthening Temujin's reputation as a leader capable of both decisiveness and diplomacy. Temujin also understood the importance of symbolic gestures. Horses, gifts, and the careful distribution of spoils became not mere rewards, but tools to reinforce loyalty, gratitude, and interdependence. He recognized that trust was cultivated through action as much as words, and that a single perceived slight could unravel months of careful alliance building. Nights were spent under the vast Mongolian sky, stars glittering like scattered jewels across the velvet darkness, where Temujin and Bort would discuss strategy, recount the day's events, and reflect on the lessons embedded in both triumph and challenge. The wind carried distant sounds, the braying of horses, the chatter of guards, the rustle of grass, and reminded Temujin of the delicate balance between power, perception, and responsibility. By the end of this season, the young leader had solidified not only a personal partnership but a broader framework of alliances that would serve as the foundation for future campaigns. He had learned that leadership was not merely about strength, bravery, or vengeance, but about weaving networks of trust, understanding human nature, and aligning personal ambition with the needs and expectations of others. In the union with Bort, in the alliances forged across clans, and in the careful exercise of diplomacy, Temujin was shaping the qualities that would define him. A leader capable of commanding both hearts and armies, a figure whose vision extended far beyond the immediate horizon of the steppe, toward a destiny as vast, unpredictable, and formidable as the land itself. The steppe, wide and untamed, shimmered under the late afternoon sun, a vast expanse of gold and green stretching to horizons that seemed infinite. The rolling grasses whispered secrets to the wind, secrets that Temujin had learned to listen to as carefully as he listened to the council of men. By now, he was a young man with a growing reputation, clever, disciplined, and unafraid to act decisively. Yet with rising influence came rising envy, and the tribes of Mongolia were fertile ground for rivalries, petty and grand, subtle and violent, all intertwined in the web of survival and ambition. Some chieftains, threatened by Temujin's growing authority, plotted behind his back, weaving stories of disrespect, fabricating insults, and attempting to turn allies against him. Temujin had learned early that words, like arrows, could strike as effectively as swords. It was not enough to be brave, he needed to perceive intentions, measure reactions, and anticipate moves before they happened. Betrayal often arrived disguised as friendship. One day, a supposed ally invited Temujin to a feast to celebrate the spring migration. Tents lined the banks of a sparkling river, fires burning as smoke curled into the sky. Warriors laughed, drums pounded, and the air was heavy with roasted meats and the tang of fermented mare's milk. But Temujin, attuned to nuance, noticed subtle anomalies. A glance too long, a hesitation in greeting, hands resting near concealed weapons. He sensed the trap before it fully revealed itself. He excused himself to a nearby ridge, observing from afar as the feast became a theater of deception. That night, the would-be ambushers found themselves facing the calm, deliberate presence of Temujin and his loyal followers, who had silently circled the perimeter, ready to counter any aggression. Confrontation came not with chaos, but with precision. Temujin addressed the rival leader with quiet authority, exposing knowledge of the plot, revealing both the plan and its flaws. The ambushers, seeing their scheme dismantled before it began, were forced to yield. Some fled, some pledged allegiance under duress, and the lessons of loyalty, fear, and respect were etched deeper into the minds of all who witnessed the encounter. Rivalries were not only external. Within his own growing network, disputes over rank, honor, and recognition occasionally flared. Temujin, ever patient and observant, managed these tensions with a combination of discipline, fairness, and strategic allocation of responsibility. Those who demonstrated merit were rewarded, regardless of birth. Those who faltered or betrayed were disciplined, sometimes harshly, but always with purpose. By balancing fear with respect, reward with consequence, Temujin cultivated an atmosphere where loyalty became earned rather than demanded. One particularly notable betrayal occurred when a former ally, swayed by promises from another clan, attempted to divert a herd of horses essential to Temujin's operations. Instead of responding with reckless violence, Temujin orchestrated a careful interception, reclaiming the herd and demonstrating both strategic cunning and the ability to anticipate human behavior. This victory reinforced his emerging reputation not merely as a warrior, but as a tactician and leader of unusual foresight. Nights under the expansive star-filled sky became moments of reflection. Temujin considered the nature of power and trust, the fragility of alliances, and the constant presence of danger that defined life on the steppe. He wrote lessons in his mind, rehearsing speeches, strategies, and potential responses to threats, knowing that every encounter, every betrayal, every challenge was shaping him for the larger role he was destined to play. By the time the grasslands turned golden with late summer, Temujin had emerged not only unbroken by rivalries and betrayals but strengthened. His network of alliances was tested and proven, his understanding of human nature deepened, and his command over both men and strategy became more absolute. The Mongolian steppe, vast, untamed, and unpredictable, had forged him through hardship, deception, and confrontation. And in the quiet moments, when the wind swept across the plains and the distant cry of a hawk echoed through the hills, Temujin could feel the subtle pulse of destiny, a rhythm that matched his own growing ambition, guiding him ever forward toward unity, conquest, and the shaping of an empire that would one day stretch farther than the eye could see. The steppe seemed endless, a golden sea under a sky so wide it felt as if one could ride forever and never reach its edge. Temujin, now entering his early 20s, rode among the rolling grasses with a quiet intensity that marked him as different from other young men. He had survived loss, betrayal, and hardship. He had cultivated loyalty through skill, foresight, and respect. Yet the world of the Mongolian clans demanded more than personal courage. Survival, influence, and ultimately power required men bound not by birth but by trust, skill, and shared vision. And so Temujin began the delicate, deliberate process of gathering warriors, a cohort of loyal companions who would not merely fight for him but with him, who would see in his leadership both fairness and purpose. He started with those he had tested in the small trials of his youth, hunts, skirmishes, and negotiations. Men who had proven not only bravery but intelligence, the ability to follow orders and think independently. He rewarded merit, not status, choosing men for skill and loyalty rather than clan affiliation alone. The steppe's hierarchy, traditionally rooted in birthright, was slowly being reshaped by Temujin's insistence on merit. Early mornings were filled with rigorous drills and exercises, often in silence, the horses hooves pounding against frozen or thawing ground, the men moving with precision across the grasslands. He taught them to ride as a single organism, to anticipate each other's movements, to respond to signals whispered across the wind. Archery became second nature, not only shooting at targets but from moving mounts, testing both physical skill and mental focus. Discipline was instilled gently at first, then firmly. Loyalty was earned through trust, competence, and shared hardship, not by fear alone. But Temujin understood that a band of warriors was more than skill. It was cohesion, a sense of unity forged in shared struggle and respect. To nurture this, he led hunts and journeys that tested endurance, requiring men to cooperate, rely on each other's strengths, and adapt to unexpected challenges. Tales of legendary warriors and ancestors were recounted around campfires, teaching both inspiration and caution, while practical knowledge of the land, tracking, water sources, shelter, was passed down in tandem. Diplomacy also played a role in his gathering. Temujin traveled beyond his immediate region, visiting allied clans, negotiating terms of loyalty, and sometimes confronting hesitation or reluctance with demonstrations of strategy or courage. One memorable encounter involved a chieftain hesitant to join him. Temujin did not press with threats. Instead, he orchestrated a controlled hunt, presenting the rival with opportunities to demonstrate skill, strategy, and mutual reliance. By the end, the chieftain and his warriors had voluntarily pledged allegiance, impressed by Temujin's foresight, patience, and the respect with which he treated potential allies. Nights were spent under vast skies, stars glittering like a scattering of silver coins on black velvet. Temujin observed his growing cohort, noting their interactions, strengths, and weaknesses, always attentive to the subtle currents of trust, fear, camaraderie, and envy. He knew that a leader must see not only the surface of action but the hidden currents of intention, for even the strongest warriors could falter if disunited or misled. By the time the grass turned bronze with the approach of autumn, Temujin's force had solidified into more than a collection of warriors. It had become a disciplined, cohesive, and loyal army, bound not by blood alone but by shared experience, mutual respect, and the guiding hand of a leader who had endured hardship, observed keenly, and understood both human nature and the unforgiving demands of the steppe. This gathering of warriors marked a turning point. Temujin was no longer merely a survivor of hardship or a cunning negotiator. He was a commander capable of molding disparate men into a single, formidable force, a precursor to the legendary army that would one day sweep across continents, reshaping the world. And as he watched his men train beneath the setting sun, the horizon burning orange and crimson, Temujin could feel the pulse of destiny, steady and insistent, urging him forward toward the unification of tribes, the assertion of justice, and the forging of an empire as vast and enduring as the endless steppe beneath his feet. The wind swept relentlessly across the Mongolian steppe, carrying the scent of sun-baked grass and distant rivers, whispering through the ridges and hollows as if sharing secrets of the land itself. Temujin, now a young man tempered by hardship, loyalty, and strategic brilliance, stood at the edge of a gathering that would mark the turning point of his life and the destiny of the Mongol people. Tribes from far and wide had come, drawn by reputation, curiosity, and the subtle promises of unity in a land often divided by clan rivalries. The horizon seemed to ripple with anticipation, the horses stamping and neighing, the tents swaying lightly in the wind, as if the very earth held its breath for what was about to unfold. At the heart of the assembly, Temujin observed not just the warriors but the subtle dynamics between chieftains, the glances of envy, the posture of respect, the gestures of loyalty. Every element mattered, every signal was a story, every hesitation a potential threat or opportunity. He had spent years forging alliances, cultivating loyalty, testing the courage and intelligence of men, and now the culmination of that effort demanded a formal recognition. A unification of the Mongol tribes under one banner, a transformation of his identity from Temujin, son of Yesugei, to Genghis Khan, ruler of all Mongols. The ceremony was both political and symbolic. Elders and leaders convened in a wide circle, their eyes sharp, their hands resting on weapons, their expressions a mixture of skepticism, hope, and ambition. Temujin's allies flanked him, disciplined, alert, the embodiment of the merit-based cohesion he had cultivated over years of careful effort. He stepped forward, voice calm yet carrying across the expanse, addressing the assembly with clarity, authority, and vision. The steppe has taught us all its lessons: strength, patience, cunning, and endurance, he began, eyes scanning the faces of allies and rivals alike. Too long have we been divided. Too long have rivalries weakened us, leaving us vulnerable to both the harsh land and the enemies who lurk beyond. Today, we rise together. Today, we choose unity over discord, vision over fear, loyalty over envy. A murmur ran through the assembly, a mixture of approval and hesitation. Some leaders shifted uneasily, still wary of relinquishing autonomy, while others recognized the inevitability of his influence and the promise of a stronger, united Mongol nation. One elder, the tallest among the Borjigin advisors, stepped forward and placed a hand on Temujin's shoulder. "Let the name you now bear signify the bond we forged today," he intoned. "Genghis Khan, leader and unifier, may your wisdom guide us, and may the strength of the steppe be your shield and your sword." The title, meaning universal ruler, was conferred not as a mere honorific, but as a mantle of responsibility, expectation, and destiny. From that moment, Temujin was transformed. No longer merely a young man of ambition and skill, he became the embodiment of unity, a leader whose authority rested on both earned respect and strategic insight, whose vision extended across the endless plains and beyond. Immediately, the dynamics of the steppe shifted. Tribes once reluctant to cooperate began tentative negotiations under his oversight. Small skirmishes that had threatened his rise were quelled through diplomacy, firmness, and the demonstration of organizational discipline. Genghis Khan's presence commanded attention, his decisions guided not only by personal ambition but by a strategic understanding of loyalty, justice, and foresight. His army, once a collection of disparate warriors, now coalesced into a disciplined, cohesive force, trained not just for combat but for cooperation, communication, and flexibility. The foundations of the legendary Mongol military that would soon be feared across continents. Beyond the practical consolidation of power, the birth of Genghis Khan carried symbolic weight. It marked the promise of a new order, one in which merit and loyalty were valued over birthright alone, in which justice and strategy were intertwined, and in which the Mongol people could envision strength and survival as a collective, not merely an individual struggle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the steppe in molten gold and crimson, Genghis Khan stood atop a ridge, the wind tugging at his hair and robes, the eyes of thousands upon him, and felt the gravity of both his role and his destiny. The steppe stretched endlessly before him, untamed, unpredictable, magnificent, and alive. In that vastness, he sensed the beginning of something extraordinary, a unification not only of people, but of purpose, ambition, and vision, a spark that would ignite the rise of an empire destined to reshape the world in ways no one yet fully comprehended. The early morning mist clung to the Mongolian plains like a delicate veil, softening the contours of hills and rivers, and giving the world a surreal, almost dreamlike quality. Genghis Khan, newly named and fully aware of the weight of his title, moved among his assembled warriors and allied chieftains, feeling the hum of energy and expectation that vibrated across the wide open land. Unification, he knew, was not a single act of declaration but a long, intricate process, requiring both diplomacy and the strategic use of force, tempered with vision, patience, and the ability to inspire loyalty across tribes historically divided by rivalry and suspicion. The first task was to establish the legitimacy of his leadership among tribes that had long resisted consolidation. He traveled extensively, riding for days through the grasslands, the sun casting long, shifting shadows, as he visited clans one by one. Each interaction was carefully orchestrated, combining gestures of respect with demonstrations of strategic insight. A feast might begin with shared meat and fermented mare's milk, accompanied by storytelling that reminded clans of shared heritage, common struggles, and the inevitability of cooperation in the face of a harsh world. Genghis Khan was attentive to the smallest details, the tone of a leader's voice, the positioning of guests, the subtle exchange of glances. Every signal mattered, every hesitation revealed potential vulnerability or opportunity. He invited rival leaders to hunt together, turning these excursions into both tests of skill and exercises in trust. Cooperation during hunts became a metaphor for the larger collaboration he envisioned, a demonstration that success depended not solely on individual strength but on coordination, strategy, and mutual reliance. Yet unification was not achieved through diplomacy alone. Certain clans resisted, clinging to autonomy and old grudges. In these cases, Genghis Khan combined decisive military action with strategic intimidation. He never acted with reckless cruelty. Rather, he sought to demonstrate both the futility of resistance and the benefits of alliance. In one notable engagement, a defiant tribe refused a peaceful negotiation. Genghis Khan led a small, disciplined force, outmaneuvering their defenses with a combination of speed, coordination, and psychological strategy. The result was swift but measured. Key leaders were captured and treated with respect, while the warriors who had resisted were offered reintegration into his growing confederation under terms that emphasized loyalty and opportunity rather than mere subjugation. Through these actions, the tribes gradually began to recognize that the young leader's vision offered not only security and stability but the potential for prosperity, influence, and shared identity. Bonds were further strengthened through carefully arranged marriages, strategic placement of loyal commanders in positions of influence, and a merit-based promotion system that rewarded skill, intelligence, and dedication over birthright alone. Within Genghis Khan's inner circle, discipline, trust, and mutual respect became the foundation of cohesion. Warriors trained relentlessly, practiced tactics that emphasized speed and flexibility, and internalized the notion that loyalty was reciprocal. The leader protected, rewarded, and guided, while followers obeyed, endured, and contributed strategically to shared goals. Nights under the vast, star-studded sky offered moments of reflection and planning. Genghis Khan observed the vastness of the steppe, the patterns of rivers and herds, the movements of clouds, and the subtle changes of wind. He considered potential threats from both rival tribes and distant kingdoms, formulating strategies that blended diplomacy, intelligence, and swift, precise military action. Over the course of several seasons, the Mongolian steppe, once fragmented into countless independent clans, began to feel the pulse of unity. Tribes once hostile now exchanged gifts, participated in shared hunts, and contributed to joint defense initiatives. Genghis Khan's growing authority was reinforced by both respect and fear, a combination that ensured compliance and encouraged loyalty without stifling initiative. By the time the autumn winds swept across the plains, painting the grass in shades of bronze and amber, Genghis Khan's vision of a unified Mongol nation had moved from concept to reality. The clans, once fractured and at the mercy of their own rivalries, now recognized the necessity and the advantages of coordinated strength under a leader who combined wisdom, courage, and the unyielding drive of destiny. And as he stood atop a ridge, watching the horizon stretch endlessly before him, Genghis Khan could feel the living pulse of the steppe, its vastness both a challenge and a promise. He understood that unification was merely the beginning, a foundation upon which greater ambitions, campaigns, and legacies would be built, a prelude to an era that would extend far beyond the windswept plains of Mongolia into lands that had yet to dream of his name. The Mongolian steppes stretched endlessly under a pale winter sun, the grass stiff with frost and the distant mountains blurred by the morning haze. Genghis Khan, now a leader of multiple unified tribes, understood that consolidation of power required not only diplomacy and loyalty but a revolutionary approach to military organization. The scattered, loosely allied clans of the steppe had fought effectively in raids and skirmishes, but lacked the discipline, coordination, and structure necessary to dominate larger regions or confront external empires. It was here that Genghis Khan's vision began to reshape the very nature of warfare. Central to his strategy was the introduction of the Tumen system, a hierarchical organization dividing his forces into units of tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. Each unit was assigned a commander based on merit, skill, and proven loyalty rather than birthright, a radical departure from traditional Mongol clan structures. These commanders were empowered to act decisively within their units, fostering initiative and rapid response in the field while maintaining cohesion across the larger army. This system allowed unprecedented flexibility. Small units could conduct reconnaissance, raids, or feints independently, while larger formations could coordinate devastating attacks with speed and precision. Genghis Khan also emphasized discipline and communication. Messengers and signal systems using flags, smoke, and riders ensured that orders could traverse vast distances almost instantaneously. Cavalry units practiced maneuvers that allowed them to encircle enemies, feign retreats, and strike with devastating timing. Each warrior carried multiple bows and a reserve of arrows, and was trained to fight both mounted and on foot, adapting seamlessly to changing circumstances. Beyond logistics and organization, Genghis Khan innovated in psychological warfare. He cultivated a reputation of ruthless efficiency, ensuring that stories of swiftness, cruelty to enemies who resisted, and generosity to those who surrendered spread quickly. He understood the power of perception. Fear could weaken resistance before a sword was drawn, while loyalty and respect could inspire warriors to exceed their own limits. The crisp morning air carried the faint scent of smoke and the distant sound of horse hooves pounding across the frozen grass. Genghis Khan's eyes scanned the horizon, noting the rise and fall of the hills, the scattered tents of the merchants, and the patterns of movement among their warriors. The Merkits had long been a thorn in the side of Temujin's family, responsible not only for raids but for the earlier abduction of Bort, his beloved wife. Though time had passed and alliances shifted, the memory of that injustice remained a driving force, and the campaign against the Merkits was as much about justice as it was about expansion and consolidation. Preparation was meticulous. Scouts were dispatched to monitor Merkits' camps, tracking daily routines, assessing the strength and morale of their forces, and identifying weaknesses. Genghis Khan divided his forces into tumans, small and large units capable of independent action yet ready to coordinate for maximum effect. Signals were established, contingencies planned, and timing measured to the precise rhythm of the sun across the steppe. The approach was both strategic and psychological. Messages were sent ahead offering terms of surrender, demonstrating both fairness and authority, while also establishing the inevitability of consequence for those who resisted. When the campaign began, Genghis Khan executed a combination of swift mounted assaults, feigned retreats, and strategic encirclements, designed to disorient, intimidate, and force the Merkits into decisions that favored his forces. The first skirmishes were tests of strength and discipline. Mounted archers struck from unexpected angles, withdrawing to draw Merkits into traps where larger units lay in waiting. Coordinated attacks minimized casualties among Genghis Khan's men while gradually eroding the morale of the defenders. The Merkits, renowned for their ferocity but unprepared for such coordinated precision, began to falter. Key leaders were isolated and captured, their surrender negotiated with both firmness and respect. Throughout the campaign, Genghis Khan maintained a balance of severity and clemency. Villages and warriors who resisted were subdued decisively, while those who accepted his authority were integrated into his growing confederation. Their warriors trained under his tumen system and their leaders shown fairness that fostered loyalty rather than resentment. The abduction of Bort years earlier had left wounds that demanded attention beyond the battlefield. When Genghis Khan's forces reclaimed her, the reunion was both emotional and politically significant. Bort's presence, her recognition of his strength, and the demonstration of his commitment to justice reinforced his authority and inspired loyalty among both his immediate followers and the allied tribes observing from afar. Campaigns against the Merkits also served as practical tests for his army. The movement across harsh terrain, the coordination of multiple units, and the integration of newly allied warriors provided real-world training that sharpened discipline and cohesion, preparing the army for even larger conquests in the future. Nights were spent around fires, the cold wind biting but softened by the warmth of the flames, as warriors shared stories, recounted lessons, and observed the loyalty, courage, and initiative of their companions. Genghis Khan moved among them, offering guidance, correction, and encouragement, ensuring that the bonds forged in action translated into enduring loyalty. By the conclusion of the campaign, the Merkits were subdued, their lands incorporated into Genghis Khan's growing dominion, and their warriors either integrated or neutralized. The campaign was both a personal triumph and a strategic victory, demonstrating the effectiveness of his leadership, the precision of the tumen system, and the practical application of discipline, loyalty, and psychological strategy. Beyond the immediate conquest, it sent a clear message across the steppe. Genghis Khan's authority was rising, his reach extending, and his capacity for both justice and decisive action unmatched. And as he gazed across the reclaimed lands, the plains stretching into the horizon, Genghis Khan felt the wind sweeping over him like the pulse of the steppe itself, carrying the promise of future campaigns, expanding power, and the vision of a unified Mongol nation under his command, bound by loyalty, respect, and the unyielding force of destiny. The steppe, wide and golden under the afternoon sun, seemed to stretch endlessly, a living tapestry of grass, rivers, and rolling hills. Genghis Khan, riding among his unified forces, understood that military victories alone could not secure the future of his burgeoning empire. The tribes of Mongolia were bound by tenuous alliances, fragile loyalties, and centuries of rivalries, and one misstep could unravel years of careful consolidation. Diplomacy, intelligence, and strategic marriages were as vital as cavalry and archers in maintaining authority. Genghis Khan moved deliberately, seeking alliances with tribes who had once been adversaries. His approach combined respect, demonstration of strength, and the promise of mutual benefit. Leaders were invited to hunts, feasts, and councils, opportunities for both observation and subtle negotiation. Every gesture mattered, the way one dismounted, the placement of a yurt in relation to others, the order in which elders were greeted, all were interpreted as signs of honor, trustworthiness, or cunning. Yet not all overtures were met with sincerity. Some tribes, while outwardly pledging loyalty, secretly plotted resistance, seeking to exploit perceived weaknesses in Genghis Khan's authority. Intelligence networks were established, scouts and spies blending into villages, observing behavior, gathering information on allegiances, and monitoring the movements of rival leaders. The skillful blending of diplomacy and surveillance allowed Genghis Khan to anticipate betrayal before it manifested fully, ensuring that when confrontations arose, they were executed with precision and authority. One notable incident involved a coalition of clans who feigned submission while secretly amassing forces to challenge his growing dominion. Genghis Khan, informed by intelligence and careful observation, invited the coalition leaders to a council under the pretense of negotiation. As they spoke, subtly attempting to sow discord, he listened carefully, noting inconsistencies, hesitation, and veiled threats. The council became a stage for exposure. He revealed his knowledge of their duplicity, offering them the choice to genuinely align under his authority or face decisive military action. The decision was swift. Some fled, others submitted fully, their warriors integrated into his forces under strict terms, reinforcing both the perception and the reality of Genghis Khan's strategic genius. Strategic marriages further solidified alliances, weaving bonds of loyalty through both familial and political channels. Leaders who might once have resisted were now bound by kinship, their fates intertwined with the stability and growth of the unified Mongol nation. Beyond political alliances, Genghis Khan also fostered a culture of meritocracy within his army and leadership circle. Loyalty, skill, and intelligence were rewarded, while incompetence or betrayal was addressed swiftly and publicly, sending a clear message that both opportunity and consequence were determined by actions rather than lineage alone. Through careful balance, Genghis Khan cultivated both fear and respect, a combination that ensured compliance without stifling initiative. His forces became a mirror of his leadership, disciplined, cohesive, adaptable, and motivated by both personal and collective incentive. Nights under the wide, starry sky offered moments of reflection. The wind carried the faint cry of distant wolves, the rustle of grass, and the soft murmurs of men at watch. Genghis Khan considered the fragile nature of trust, the necessity of vigilance, and the unpredictable currents of human ambition. Each alliance, each act of diplomacy, was a thread in the larger fabric of the empire he sought to weave, a tapestry designed to endure beyond immediate victories and to project power across both steppe and distant lands. By the time winter approached, the Mongol Confederation was stronger than ever. Tribes once fractured now operated with cohesion, loyalty reinforced by both personal bonds and calculated authority. Betrayal had been met with swift justice and clever integration. Diplomacy had transformed potential adversaries into allies, and the foundations of a unified, disciplined, and loyal empire were solidified. As Genghis Khan stood atop a frost-dusted hill, observing the movement of his forces, the wind tugging at his cloak, he felt the quiet satisfaction of a strategy executed with precision. The steppe stretched endlessly before him, alive with potential, challenge, and promise, and he understood that the careful balance of alliances, loyalty, and vigilance was as critical to conquest and survival as the mastery of warfare itself, a lesson that would guide every decision and campaign in the years to come. The bitter chill of early winter settled across the Mongolian steppe, frost sparkling on the long blades of grass like scattered diamonds, and Genghis Khan, mounted atop his horse, felt the cold bite against his skin as he surveyed the horizon. The Tartars, a powerful and long-feared tribe, had long posed a threat to the stability of the region. Their raids had left villages plundered, families displaced, and rival clans wary. For Genghis Khan, the campaign against the Tartars was not merely an act of vengeance but a crucial step in solidifying his authority, demonstrating the power of the newly unified Mongol forces, and asserting a standard of justice and retribution across the steppe. Preparation was meticulous. Scouts were dispatched to observe Tartar movements, noting not only their numbers but the location of their encampments, defensive strategies, and the disposition of leaders. Genghis Khan divided his forces into tumens, ensuring each unit was fully coordinated and capable of rapid response. Signals, contingencies, and fallback plans were established with precision, the disciplined organization of his army ensuring flexibility and adaptability in the face of uncertainty. The campaign began with a series of calculated strikes. Mounted archers executed feigned retreats, drawing Tartar forces out of fortified positions, while concealed units executed flanking maneuvers that trapped the Tartars and disrupted their formations. Coordination and timing were crucial. Each movement was choreographed to exploit both terrain and the psychology of the enemy, creating confusion and fear. Genghis Khan's leadership was both visible and subtle. He rode among his units, observing, advising, and occasionally intervening directly. But he also allowed his commanders autonomy to act decisively, reinforcing initiative and accountability. Communication flowed seamlessly through signals and messengers, ensuring that every tumen acted in concert, transforming individual actions into a cohesive, devastating force. Beyond the battlefield, Genghis Khan employed psychological tactics to undermine the Tartars' morale. Messages of surrender and leniency were sent to villages and leaders willing to submit, while stories of swift retribution for those who resisted spread rapidly. Fear, tempered by the promise of mercy for those who aligned, became a strategic weapon, reducing resistance and accelerating the consolidation of power. Engagements were brutal but precise. The Tartars, skilled and numerous, initially fought fiercely, but the disciplined coordination, mobility, and strategy of Genghis Khan's forces gradually wore them down. Leaders were captured and treated with calculated fairness, their warriors either integrated into Mongol ranks or neutralized in ways that reinforced both order and the perception of authority. The campaign also tested the resilience and cohesion of Genghis Khan's army. Harsh weather, frozen rivers, and uneven terrain challenged endurance and logistics. Yet training, discipline, and mutual reliance ensured that men and horses alike adapted and persisted. Nights were spent around controlled fires, the cold wind whipping across the steppe, as men shared lessons learned, recounted acts of courage, and strengthened bonds forged through hardship. By the conclusion of the campaign, the Tartars were decisively subdued. Their lands were brought under the control of Genghis Khan's growing confederation, their warriors either absorbed into the disciplined ranks or neutralized, and their influence as a destabilizing force on the steppe eliminated. The campaign against the Tartars had multiple consequences. It demonstrated the effectiveness of the tumen system in large-scale engagements, reinforced the authority and reputation of Genghis Khan, and sent a clear message to all tribes across the Mongolian plains that resistance was futile against a leader who combined strategy, discipline, and psychological insight. As Genghis Khan surveyed the snow-dusted plains, the wind carrying both the silence of the conquered and the distant murmur of allied clans, he understood the significance of this victory. It was not merely a military triumph but a consolidation of authority, a reinforcement of the systems, discipline, and loyalty that underpinned his leadership, and a signal that the Mongol Confederation, once fragile and divided, had begun to emerge as an unstoppable force, capable of shaping the destiny of not only the steppe but, in time, lands far beyond its horizon. The sun rose over the steppe, spilling light across frozen rivers and frost-tipped grass, as Genghis Khan rode alongside his commanders, the wind tugging at his cloak and carrying the faint scent of smoke from distant fires. The recent victory against the Tartars had reverberated across the plains, spreading tales of his strategic brilliance, fairness to allies, and ruthless efficiency toward those who resisted. Stories traveled faster than horsemen, whispered from campfires, shouted across valleys, and carried in the wary eyes of rival chieftains. Temujin's reputation was no longer merely local. It was becoming legendary. But reputation was a delicate currency, easily tarnished by arrogance or misstep, and Genghis Khan understood the need to nurture it carefully. He convened councils, inviting leaders from allied clans to participate in decision-making, a gesture that reinforced loyalty while subtly asserting his vision of unified governance. His approach was equal parts respect and authority. He listened attentively, weighed counsel, yet ultimately made decisions with clarity and decisiveness that left no room for doubt regarding his leadership. Across the steppe, smaller clans began to realign their loyalties, seeking the protection, guidance, and opportunity that association with Genghis Khan promised. Some submitted voluntarily, motivated by admiration and pragmatism. Others, wary of confrontation, recognized the inevitability of his influence and acquiesced with calculated caution. In the growing network of alliances, meritocracy became the binding principle. Warriors, commanders, and advisors were promoted based on skill, intelligence, and loyalty rather than heritage or birthright. This unprecedented system inspired both confidence and ambition among followers, who understood that their contributions mattered, that courage and strategy could elevate them beyond the limitations of clan hierarchy. Reputation, however, was not built solely on diplomacy or governance. Campaigns across the steppe, precise, disciplined, and strategically executed, reinforced the narrative of an unstoppable force. Skirmishes, raids, and decisive battles showcased both innovation and discipline, illustrating that Genghis Khan's leadership was defined not only by personal valor but by the integration of organization, intelligence, and psychological insight. Beyond the battlefield, Genghis Khan cultivated the loyalty of his people through fairness, generosity, and careful attention to justice. Villagers who had suffered at the hands of rival tribes were protected, compensated, and integrated into his expanding realm, fostering a sense of security and allegiance that complemented military strength. Even rival leaders who had been subdued were treated in ways that encouraged respect, obedience, and cooperation. Within his inner circle, the emphasis on trust, accountability, and merit strengthened cohesion. Warriors trained relentlessly, practiced maneuvers across varying terrain, and adapted to changing circumstances, forging an army as disciplined and flexible as the steppe itself. Psychological acumen became a hallmark of leadership. Knowledge of human nature, the anticipation of betrayal, and the understanding of loyalty were as critical as skill with the bow or the spear. Tales of Genghis Khan's cleverness, fairness, and unyielding determination spread, blending fact and legend. Stories described his ability to outwit rivals, anticipate ambushes, and reward loyalty with both generosity and honor. These narratives reinforced both fear and admiration, shaping perception in ways that extended his influence far beyond the immediate reach of his army. By the onset of spring, the Mongolian steppe had begun to recognize a singular truth: Genghis Khan was no ordinary chieftain. His strategic brilliance, combined with meritocratic leadership, disciplined military organization, and psychological insight, had created an authority both respected and feared. Tribes that once competed independently now coordinated, rival warriors observed discipline, and alliances solidified under the dual promise of security and opportunity. Standing atop a ridge, Genghis Khan watched the horizon stretch endlessly before him, the morning sun gilding the frost-kissed grass and distant rivers. He understood that reputation was a living, fragile force, constantly shaped by action, perception, and strategic vision. Yet with each campaign, each council, and each act of measured justice, he strengthened not only the unity of his people but the foundation upon which a vast empire could be built, one that would extend beyond the steppe, beyond the known world, into the realm of legend and history alike. Winter had begun to release its icy grip on the Mongolian steppe, leaving trails of snow and frost that glimmered in the rising sun like scattered jewels. Genghis Khan, now firmly established as the leader of a unified Mongol nation, turned his vision outward, toward lands beyond the familiar plains, toward the territories of the Jin dynasty in northern China. The Jin dynasty, wealthy, fortified, and accustomed to relative security, had long maintained influence over border tribes, extracting tribute and intervening in local disputes. For Genghis Khan, these incursions were not merely inconvenient, they represented both a strategic threat and an opportunity to project Mongol power beyond the steppe. Preparation for this campaign was meticulous. Genghis Khan dispatched scouts to gather intelligence on fortifications, supply routes, troop numbers, and terrain. Detailed maps were constructed from first-hand observations and reports, noting rivers, hills, and potential ambush points. Every Tumen was briefed not only on objectives but on the underlying strategic principles guiding the operation: speed, adaptability, psychological pressure, and precise coordination. The first incursions into Jin territory demonstrated the efficacy of Mongol military innovation. Mounted archers executed feigned retreats to lure defenders from fortified positions, only to have hidden units strike from flanking directions, cutting off retreat and creating confusion. Supply lines were protected with care, and communication was maintained across vast distances through an elaborate system of mounted messengers, signal fires, and flags. Beyond battlefield tactics, Genghis Khan leveraged psychological warfare. He sent envoys offering surrender and protection to towns and villages willing to align with Mongol authority, while ensuring that tales of swift, uncompromising retribution reached those who resisted. This combination of fear and pragmatism encouraged compliance and reduced unnecessary bloodshed, demonstrating his understanding that conquest required both strategy and perception. Negotiations were intertwined with military maneuvers. When a fortified Jin city resisted, Genghis Khan observed and exploited internal divisions, encouraging factions willing to submit to act decisively against their own leaders, sowing discord and weakening defense from within. Siege tactics, while relatively primitive compared to later developments, were enhanced by mobility, encirclement, and persistent pressure, gradually forcing surrender or negotiation. Amid the strategic execution, Genghis Khan maintained a presence that reinforced both loyalty and morale among his own forces. He moved among commanders, offering guidance, observing discipline, and rewarding initiative. Even minor successes were recognized, fostering a culture in which skill and intelligence were valued, reinforcing cohesion and promoting trust. The campaign against the Jin dynasty also highlighted the importance of logistics and endurance. Mongol forces traversed varied terrain, from frozen rivers and wooded valleys to open plains and walled cities. Horses were rotated and cared for meticulously, provisions calculated precisely, and units moved with coordination that allowed sustained operations far from home territory. By the conclusion of the initial campaign, the Mongols had demonstrated both the vulnerability of the Jin defenses and the disciplined effectiveness of their military system. Tribes and towns observed the rising influence and capability of Genghis Khan, realizing the inevitability of his authority and the reach of his forces. The campaign against the Jin dynasty marked a pivotal expansion of Mongol ambition, from consolidating the steppe to projecting power into settled, fortified regions, blending strategy, adaptability, and psychological mastery. Standing atop a ridge overlooking a captured city, the winter sun glinting off frozen rooftops, Genghis Khan felt the pulse of destiny resonating across the land. The steppe had forged him. Now he was shaping the broader world, a force whose influence would soon extend far beyond the grasslands, reshaping kingdoms, alliances, and the course of history itself. The wind swept across the Mongolian steppe, carrying the faint scent of earth, grass, and distant fires. As Genghis Khan paused atop a ridge, the vast horizon stretching endlessly before him. His campaigns, meticulously planned and executed, had transformed him from Temujin, the young chieftain of fractured tribes, into Genghis Khan, the unifier of the Mongols and a force whose influence reached beyond the steppe into the fortified cities of empires. Each victory, each alliance forged, each carefully balanced act of diplomacy and discipline had solidified not only his power but the cohesion, loyalty, and identity of a people once divided by rivalry. The Tumen system, the campaigns against the Merkits, Tartars, and the Jin dynasty, and the delicate blending of fear, respect, and meritocracy had all demonstrated his vision. An empire built on strategy, adaptability, and the unity of diverse tribes under a single purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, gilding the frost-kissed plains in gold and crimson, Genghis Khan felt the weight of history pressing gently upon him, yet also the exhilarating promise of the future.